Hi, I'm Mark Bodman. Thank you for joining me on this next edition of IT4IT Insights. This is a channel where I'm providing some insights on the IT4IT standard and a little bit of how I use it and sort of some of my viewpoints about the standard and how it correlates to other things, other key topics that are of interest to many IT professionals. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I see as the big disruptor within IT4IT, which is the request to fulfill value stream. This is a critical value stream that most organizations don't have a focus on these days. And the reason that most organizations don't have a key focus on this area is because they've responded to projects and delivered on those projects based on the business requirements and really haven't been able to standardize a lot of the component building blocks that are necessary within organizations to be successful. Not only that, but you're seeing this huge disintermediation of IT where IT folks are in the IT and the business are bypassing IT organizations to implement their own services, whether it be infrastructure or software or even business services outside the organization entirely. You don't just bypass IT altogether, you still need to manage, does it have the right encryption criteria for the data that you're going to be storing on those services? IT still needs to be involved, but what we haven't done is been able to have a service orientation in terms of delivery. We haven't been able to take those services and what we've learned over time and commoditize those and put them in a catalog so people can easily consume those services. And there's a huge correlation to cloud practices that I'd like to also cover here, because the cloud story is very similar to what the request to fulfill value stream addresses, and when you look at it from a cloud perspective, things really fall into place. So starting out here, these are the four value streams that comprise of IT4IT. And of course, there's strategy to portfolio, which is planning, requirements to deploy, which is build, the disruptor, which is request to fulfill, and that equates to deliver, and then detect to correct, which is run. And then detect to correct is most correlated to the operational aspects of an IT organization. The area that's most disruptive is request to fulfill, because these resource catalogs are typically based on the resource domain. So for example, you might be able to go to the storage catalog or the server catalog or the software catalog, and even software is many times in many different places. But the idea here is that a lot of these things need to be ordered together, very similar to what you see in Amazon.com. When you order a cell phone, you probably need to order the service and the headset that goes along with it, and maybe even a car charger. So all these things may be from different vendors, but the experience that IT needs to think about is, how do I get my consumers up and running and delighted that they have all these services brought together into a meaningful package? So deliver is really the focus of this discussion. A request to fulfill, the deliver function, is comprised of these four key value stream steps, with the first one being defining and publishing a catalog. Second one, subscribing to a service. Really what you're doing here from a service perspective is you're implementing a subscription for that particular resource, whether it be a hardware allocation or going in and using software, or even just getting an account to use software on a SaaS third-party basis. When you process the order and you fulfill the subscription, you've got to then allocate the resources, whatever they happen to be able to automate the delivery of those resources, and then updating you when those resources have been delivered, so you know you can start taking advantage of them. And then last but not least is measure, and measure consists of a number of things that most IT organizations find it very difficult to implement, which is things like chargeback and showback for the cost of that service. There's transparency on the cost of that service and whether or not you're even using it, and how much value did you individually as a subscriber get from that particular service. So there is a concept of net promoter scores. So will your consumers of your services, for example, be willing to recommend that service to their peers or other folks in their organizations? So surveys and ratings is a key input and a driver for improving on those services to make them more consumable and deliver more value. There's a number of these areas which are very well coordinated with cloud standards and cloud practices, and I wanted to point out a few of these things. The first one is really defining and publishing a catalog in the first place. So when you think about going out and subscribing to services in the market, you're subscribing to services that somebody else has put on the market through some sort of definition and a publishing process. The second part of those service acquisition is to be able to have the portal be implemented internally so that people can get to those services easily and self-service the allocation for those services as easily as possible. And that's not just for the allocation of the service, but the full life cycle for changing the service or configuring it for what I need, as well as for being able to relinquish this service back into the pool of resources. So if I don't need this hardware anymore, maybe my development project is done, I can reallocate maybe my development environment, even the test environment and tools, all back into the environment so that somebody else can take advantage of those resources later. And last but not least, the big disruptor here from a cloud perspective is this whole idea of chargeback and showback, which is a critical component. Now, where these key areas come into play with a cloud perspective is the NiST 800-145 standard. This is the simplest possible cloud definition that I've ever found. And so I wanted to point out the 5 characteristics, the delivery models, and the service models. The delivery models, I only look at hybrid because, to be honest with you, most organizations will have a mix of internal resources as well as external cloud resources that would be integrated. We call that SIAM. But the idea here is that services will have an integration of internal and external resources in many cases. And so very few IT organizations will be just public or just private. It'll be a combination of those two. The next thing that I'd like to point out is the service models. When you're building a service, you need to understand that the infrastructure is sort of that smallest level of the building block. The infrastructure, if you implement the right characteristics properly, it really makes the platform in the software delivery much more effective and efficient. On the essential characteristics, the ones I wanted to point out first are these 3: the on-demand self-service, the broad network access, and measured service. By just adopting the IT4IT reference architecture and the request to fulfill value stream, you directly meet these characteristics of a cloud. These are built into the actual IT value stream, and what you need to do is just follow the prescribed architecture to meet this criteria of a cloud. Now, of course, some of these services that you implement might be brokered, some of them might be internal resources, but the point is how you manage those over time to be able to allocate those resources through some on-demand self-service catalog, as well as being able to measure those services is a critical aspect. Now, where that comes into play in IT4IT is here on the request of a value stream. And there are key couple of functions here to point out. The first is this engagement experience portal. This is really that front end to engage IT where the self-service catalog is available. You can collaborate with other folks that might be using that service. Knowledge about that service is propagated, as well as the self-service and support interactions that the service happens to provide. The second part of this that's really important is the chargeback showback. Again, just by leveraging and implementing request to fulfill, you meet this characteristic right off the bat. So the last 2 things that I wanted to talk about is resource pooling and elasticity, because these are relatively hard to implement. And when you are implementing them, you want to implement for both the internal infrastructure and the resource allocation, because this is where the rubber really meets the road. IT utilization of infrastructures is really not great. We're seeing typical metrics of 10% of hardware utilization. That would include the CPU as well as storage utilization. And utilization is different than allocation, because you may provide a team or an application with a number of gigabytes of storage or terabytes of storage, and however, in reality, most of the cases that storage is only used at a percentage of the allocation. So just because you allocated the storage doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually using it and it's being put to good use. The second part of the implementation of these 2 characteristics is public cloud as well. You need to understand how those public brokered services are being used in order to right size the service allocation. When you're looking at the resource pooling and elasticity characteristics, you need to take into account the infrastructure first, right? And also the public and private cloud cloud scenario. Most organizations that have implemented virtualization, for example, and claim that they've implemented a private cloud, many of them have not implemented elasticity or pooling very well. These are two critical characteristics that a cloud service provider is addressing well, because they can put those resources back in the pool when one customer is done with them and then allocate them somewhere else. If you were in business for yourself with a service on the market and you were competing against somebody with a comparable service, if you can pool your resources and expand and contract those resources based on utilization demand, you would do better than your competitor. Now, where these come to light within the IT4IT request to fulfill value stream are in the next set of components here. Usage is really the key element for tracking and acting on that elasticity component. The other thing too, of course, is based on usage or lack of usage, you can expand or contract the allocation of resources. And that has a huge dependency on understanding the subscription, who's subscribed to that resource, and whether or not you're going to charge more for that resource. Because maybe I've allocated a terabyte and now they're using 10 terabytes with that elasticity in place, and the chargeback showback function, I can show requiring more resources, therefore you should maybe get charged more, at least show back that you're actually costing the company more money in that case. The other key component of this scenario is service monitoring. Service monitoring is a detect to correct value stream concept, but it's a critical thing to think about when you're measuring usage. You have to not only monitor whether or not the service is up and running, but also whether or not you're using the service at all. This goes with services that are maybe deployed as applications on the laptops that you're allocating. If I allocate somebody, for example, a very expensive license for AutoCAD, and they don't use it for a year, that's a waste of money that the company could use somewhere else. Likewise, if I'm brokering a service from, let's say, Salesforce, if the salesperson that I've allocated the license to never logs on to Salesforce, this is something we want to monitor and be able to right size the allocation so that somebody else can take advantage of that license and, of course, save the company money. So the only way to accomplish this, of course, is to monitor usage and to track that usage and act on it over time. I hope that this was valuable for you. I find that the request to fulfill value stream is the key impactor when I present this to organizations. Most IT organizations are plan, build, run, and request to fulfill is sort of a missing component. By having this as a key focus and getting really good and efficient at delivering and managing services through the life cycle, I think your IT organization will experience much greater value to your business consumers. And over time, you will save money because you're managing those resources to the consumption that they actually need. So thank you very much for your time. I will be publishing another IT4IT Insight in a week, and I hope to get some more of your input to address topics that might be of interest. Thank you very much and have a great day.